Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, October 19th, 2023. No permanent U.S. House Speaker elected yet. The Republican conference nominee, Jim Jordan, at first decided not to pursue a third vote on the House floor today after losing the first two votes this week, instead to try to push to give the temporary Speaker, Patrick McHenry, additional powers to move crucial legislation. But after a meeting with House Republicans, that plan is scrapped. And Congressman Jordan says he'll try to convince the 20 or so House Republicans who have been voting against him to switch their votes to support him and get elected. We'll have the latest in just a moment. Lawyer Sidney Powell takes a plea deal in the Georgia election interference case. She's one of 18 co-defendants, which include former President Donald Trump. Sidney Powell will get 6 years probation and a $6,000 fine. The U.S. Senate passes a resolution unanimously in support of Israel's right to defend itself and condemning Hamas for its attacks that killed over 1,000 Israelis. As President Joe Biden, just back from a trip to Israel, speaks to Americans tonight from the White House Oval Office about not only Israel's war with Hamas, but Ukraine's fight against Russia's invasion. And Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell talks about the future of interest rates at the Economic Club of New York. We start with the Speaker's race. This from USA Today. The nation is in its 16th day without a Speaker of the House, and Republican lawmakers have made seemingly no progress towards electing a new permanent leader. Lawmakers looked like they were coming close to a deal after Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, backed a plan empowering Congressman Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina, as Speaker until January to get the House moving again. McHenry has already been serving as an interim Speaker with limited powers, and Jordan has lost two Speaker elections on the House floor. But after an hours-long closed-door meeting, House Republicans as a whole appeared to reject the plan, putting the lower chamber and the nation back at square one. As long as the House doesn't have a Speaker, lawmakers can't approve crucial legislation, such as government funding to avoid a shutdown or aid to Israel as the country's war rages on with Hamas. That was from USA Today. Mid-afternoon, after the closed meeting broke up, Congressman Jordan spoke to reporters.
At this moment,
so I'll just say this: we made the pitch to members on the resolution as a way to lower the temperature and get back to work. We decided that wasn't where we're going to go. I'm still running for Speaker, and I plan to go to the floor and get the votes and win this race. But I want to go talk with a few of my colleagues. Particularly, I want to talk with the 20 individuals who voted against me so that we can move forward and begin to work for the American people.
Are you going to the floor today, sir? Are you going to the floor today?
Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, the Speaker designate from the Republican Party. To be elected Speaker on the House floor, he would need the support not just of a majority of House Republicans, but almost all of them, 217 out of the 221 House Republicans. In the two votes this week, he has received 200 and 199. Former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, who was removed from office just over 2 weeks ago, also spoke to reporters about the House Republican discussions about Congressman Jordan's candidacy for Speaker and that proposal to give the temporary Speaker, Patrick McHenry, additional powers.
They're having a discussion in there. When you become Speaker, a lot of people won't know all the different rules. After 9/11, they created a system where you put names on a list if a case that you were no longer Speaker for somebody to carry out that role until you elect a new Speaker. It's about the continuity of government. I always believed the names I was putting on the list could carry out and keep government running until you elect a new Speaker. There is a question. McGovern ran down to try to make a legal question. Some people legally say McHenry has that power, and some will say doesn't have all the power. So there was a debate in there. Should we allow McHenry to have that power so we can deal with Israel and others and keep things working? I know the Democrats tried to make some legal thing against it, and that's the discussion we're having in there.
Can you
until we
explain
elect it.
specifically what happened with Matt Gaetz? Did you yell
Oh,
at him?
no. I was at the mic, I was speaking, and Matt Gaetz tried to interrupt, and so I told him to sit down, and we sat down.
What's your deal?
I think no, I told him to sit down. I think the entire conference screamed at him. People are, listen, the whole country, I think, would scream at Matt Gaetz right now. Remember, it was a Crazy Eights led by Matt Gaetz and every single Democrat that put us into this situation. We've never been in this situation before, but how do you have 4% of your conference remove a speaker when 96% are there? This is why we're here. He had no plan afterwards. Now we have Israel at a war, questions whether Congress can act, questions where we'd be able to go to select a new speaker. I mean, it's a difficult situation driven by one person for his own personal beliefs, his own animosity towards me, and his concern about what's inside an ethics complaint that was filed before I was even speaker.
What is the support for the McHenry resolution to give him more powers, and would you need Democrats to come and help you?
Well, the question in there, we'd like to have all Republicans, but they get into the bunch of legal minds, whether they're or not. I just think we need to make sure government still runs. And I think we should be having a resolution on the floor in support of Israel. I have a 5-point plan to support Israel, but the question right now is you can't do anything until you elect a speaker, and apparently there's not enough votes to elect a speaker.
Congressman Kevin McCarthy, former Speaker, Republican from California, speaking with reporters outside the closed meeting of House Republicans about that exchange that he had in the room with Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, who brought the motion to vacate that ended up ousting Speaker McCarthy. He mentioned 8 Republicans joining the Democrats in doing that just over 2 weeks ago. This story from The Hill, it reads, at what point, while speaking at the mics during the meeting, McCarthy mentioned Gaetz by name, according to a source in the room. Gaetz stood up to, quote, kind of interrupt him and say something, per a second source in the room. McCarthy then shot back, according to the second source. Sit your ass down, in quotes, McCarthy said, according to the source, prompting Gaetz to, quote, say something back. The second source said Congressman Mike Boss, Republican from Illinois, quote, was ready to lunge across the room. Congressman Matt Gaetz also stopped by the cameras outside the meeting room.
First of all, how was it in there? Did McCarthy screw at you?
Well, he loses his temper sometime. Maybe it's the Irish in him. But I actually think it was a really productive discussion. People got to get their viewpoint out. And what I'm really happy about is that this did not end with a desire to have Speaker Light or a ratified Speaker Pro Temp. It's our obligation to elect a Speaker, and I'm glad that we were able to throw cold water on Speaker Light as a governing concept.
Is the resolution dead, though?
It's not going to. I don't think it's going to be offered by Republicans. As a consequence of our discussion.
Do you know how the conference is planning to move forward at this point?
I think we're going to have another Jim Jordan vote. I can't wait to a vote.
Today or when?
Today.
Thank you.
It's Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, with reporters. Another article from thehill.com. House Republicans in swing districts are contending with a lose-lose situation. As Congressman Jordan vies for the House speakership role, vulnerable Republicans risk prompting anger from Republicans in their home districts if they don't vote for Jordan, a former President Trump ally, as Speaker, or becoming targets in districts President Biden won last cycle. That from The Hill. Congresswoman Jen Kiggins, Republican of Virginia, who voted for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker on the second ballot, spoke to reporters today about the Speaker's race and that idea of giving Speaker Pro Temp Patrick McHenry additional authorization.
Just on how the conference plans to move forward at this point.
Yeah, so I'll tell you the way that I would like to move forward, and that's with the resolution that was proposed. I think it's the right thing to do. I think I'm frustrated. There's plenty of us in that room that are frustrated. The country's frustrated. Like, we have work to do. We've been saying this for quite a while. We've got our appropriations bills that need to get passed. We're now looking at how we're going to be supportive of Israel, how we're going to condemn Hamas. So we have real work that all Americans want us to do. That's what I want to do. That's why I ran for Congress. So I support that resolution. So did Speaker McCarthy. Also stood up and said that this was the right way to move forward. We are at a standstill. It's like if we're digging a hole and you keep hitting rock, like dig in a different place. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. So I support it. I'm looking forward to it coming to the floor. I would love to see the Republican version come to the floor.
Your numbers saying that it won't come to the floor. Like Congressman Donald, Congressman Buchanan just said it's dead. I mean, why are they saying that?
I wouldn't say quite dead. We didn't vote, so we don't.
Yeah,
We don't know if there's a.
Because it could still come to the floor as a privilege
Yes,
resolution.
yes.
And you still think there's an appetite for some members to force that vote?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the list keeps growing of that this speaker candidate, is not the right one for the conference. So we can't keep just beating our head on a wall, which is what I feel like I wake up and do every day.
And Congressman Buchanan also said that there's some talk about Congressman Jordan needing to get all the 22 no votes in a room and sort of talk it out. Are you amenable to going in a room and talking it out?
So he did say he would call each one of us and find out if there wasn't a path forward. And 20 is the largest. It's 22, so he's got a large number, and he can only lose 4. So, I don't think that he's going to get there. At all.
Was there discussion in the room of any of the members who have received threats by not voting?
Yeah, that was a large part of what we did today, was to express our concern with the threats that so many of us have received from within our own party. That's the part that's most disheartening. We all have we share the same conservative values and principles. So to get those threats, to be intimidated by members of our own party are really frustrating, especially for people like me.
Does it make you more immovable? Does it make you more immovable?
I'm sorry?
Some of the threats you faced.
Yeah, on the phone and emails and texts. Yes, I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Congresswoman Jen Kiggins, Republican from Virginia, with reporters again outside the closed-door meeting of House Republicans discussing the way forward in the Speaker's race. Congressman Drew Ferguson, Republican of Georgia, one of 4 Republicans who switched votes against Jim Jordan on the second ballot. Drew Ferguson voting for Steve Scalise on that second ballot, putting out a statement that reads, "Following the first vote, I had genuine concerns about the threatening tactics and pressure campaigns Jordan and his allies were using to leverage members of their votes. I discussed this directly with Jim and planned to vote to support him on the second ballot. When the pressure campaigns and attacks on fellow members ramped up, it became clear to me that the House Republican Conference does not need a bully as the Speaker." And Congressman Ferguson saying he and his family are now getting death threats. Congressman Jordan posted Wednesday night, "No American should accost another for their beliefs. We condemn all threats against our colleagues, and it is imperative that we come together. Stop. It's abhorrent." Congressman Byron Donalds, Republican of Florida, has supported Congressman Jordan for Speaker, and he told reporters today that most House Republicans opposed expanding the powers of the Speaker Pro Temp, Patrick McHenry.
Can you speak about this plan to empower McHenry? Is that going to happen or no?
No.
No?
It's not going to happen.
Conference decided we're not moving ahead with this?
Yeah, I think that is the decision as I understand it, and I think even Patrick, to his credit and to his fidelity to the U.S. Constitution, understands that we cannot just drop powers in the lap of somebody. The House has to elect a Speaker, and then from that, everything else flows.
What is the plan moving forward now?
Well, like I've been saying the last day or two, that's a decision that Jim has to make as our nominee. Still behind Jim, still support Jim. He has my vote, but he's got to make a decision on when and where.
How long are you willing to keep your support for Jim Jordan?
I'm with Jim Jordan until Jim Jordan says he doesn't want to run anymore.
And just to clarify, did the conference actually take a vote on this plan to empower McHenry, or was it just?
No, it's you read the room. You can see it. It's the votes are just not there for it. And to my colleagues who wanted to support it, I understand why they wanted to support it. Because look, time is of the essence. There's a lot of things that we have to do, but the number one thing that this body must do is elect a Speaker before you conduct other business.
Can you characterize how those conversations went when you all were discussing whether or not to move forward with the resolution?
I mean, look, you could tell there were key disagreements, and our members, I think rightly, do not want to take a resolution like that to the floor. If something like that goes to the floor, you have to have unanimous support from our conference. It is not there.
Congressman Byron Donalds, Republican from Florida, with reporters. While Republicans have been talking, Democrats are waiting. Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi of California, former Speaker, was interviewed today on CNN about the idea of giving a temporary Speaker more power until a permanent Speaker is elected.
From a standpoint of a speakership, you really cannot give Mr. McHenry power. Someone suggested, well, just let him do this and let him do that. No, you have to make him Speaker, and then he has the awesome power of the speakership. Question is, for how long? The longevity of it. My hearing is that it will be to the end of this session, so until the end of the year. Secondly, what is the legislative scope of it? What does it contain? And third is the structure. Do they do anything about the motion to vacate, or what we do about motions, other motions on the floor. So it's substance, it's timing, it's structure. It'll be up to Hakeem, and we all have confidence in him.
Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, former Speaker, today on CNN, referring to Hakeem Jeffries of New York, the current minority leader. She said he'll make the decision whether any such reform will be supported by all the Democrats. CNN's Melanie Zanona posting today, where we're at. Jim Jordan can't get to 217. Prospects for a resolution to empower interim Speaker McHenry look grim. Members getting death threats over the Speaker vote. Lawmakers swearing and yelling at each other in closed-door meetings. Day 16 without a Speaker. This is Washington Today. Associated Press reporting out of Atlanta that lawyer Sidney Powell pleaded guilty to reduced charges Thursday over efforts to overturn Donald Trump's loss in the 2020 election in Georgia, becoming the second defendant in the sprawling case to reach a deal with prosecutors. Sidney Powell, who was charged alongside Donald Trump and 17 others with violating the state's anti-racketeering law, entered the plea just a day before jury selection was set to start in her trial. She pleaded guilty to 6 misdemeanors, accusing her of conspiring to intentionally interfere with performance of election duties. That was reporting from Associated Press. In Superior Court in Fulton County, Georgia, you'll hear from Sidney Powell answering the questions from the prosecutor, Daisha Young.
How do you plead to the 6 counts of conspiracy to commit intentional interference with performance of election duties?
Guilty.
Do you understand that you may have a limited right to appeal, which I've gone over with you?
Yes.
Judge, if this case had gone to trial, the state would have shown that between the dates of December 1st of 2020 and January 7th of 2021, the defendant, Sidney Powell, along with several co-conspirators, entered into a conspiracy to intervene with the performance of election duties of co-defendant Misty Hampton, also known as Emily Misty Hayes. At all times relevant to the conspiracy, Misty Hampton was the elections director for Coffee County, Georgia, and was subject to all duties imposed by Chapter 2 of Title 21 of OCGA. The purpose of the conspiracy was to use Misty Hampton's position to unlawfully access secure elections machines in Coffee County, Georgia. This conspiracy included the following objectives. 1, to willfully tamper with electronic ballot markers and tabulating machines. 2, to cause certain members of the conspiracy who were not officers charged by law with the care of ballots and who were not persons entrusted by any such officer with the care of ballots for a purpose required by law to possess official ballots outside of the polling place. 3, to use a computer with knowledge that such use was without authority and with the intention of taking and appropriating information, data, and software, the property of Dominion Voting Systems Corporation. 4, to use a computer with knowledge that such use was without authority and with the intention of removing voting data and Dominion Voting Systems Corporation data from said computer. 5, to use a computer with the intention of examining personal voter data with knowledge that such examination was without authority. Each of these constituted attempts to interfere with, hinder, and delay Misty Hampton in the performance of her election duties. In furtherance of these conspiracies, the defendant entered into a contract with Sullivan Strickler LLC in Fulton County, Georgia, and delivered a payment to Sullivan Strickler LLC in Fulton County, Georgia, and caused employees of Sullivan Strickler LLC to travel from Fulton County, Georgia to Coffee County, Georgia for the purpose of accomplishing the objectives of this conspiracy. These were overt acts to affect the object of the conspiracy. The data taken from Coffee County, Georgia was distributed to members of the conspiracy and unknown persons in Georgia and elsewhere. That would be the factual basis for the charges in this case.
Daisha Young, a prosecutor in Fulton County, Georgia, in the courtroom with defendant Sidney Powell, who pled guilty. According to the Associated Press, as part of the deal, she will serve 6 years of probation, will be fined $6,000, and will have to write an apology letter to Georgia and its residents. She also agreed to testify truthfully against her co-defendants at future trials. And those co-defendants include former president and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Story from CNN. President Joe Biden plans to make a direct appeal to the American people to continue funding Ukraine and Israel amid their war efforts in an Oval Office address Thursday, according to 2 administration officials. The primetime address will take place on the eve of the White House requesting north of $100 billion from Congress to deliver aid and resources to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and the U.S. border with Mexico. President Biden is expected to make the argument that supporting Ukraine and Israel is a matter of U.S. national security when the world is at an inflection point. He's going to make the case that the cost of inaction and the cost of walking away is much higher, according to one official. Reporting from CNN. The White House Principal Deputy National Security Advisor Jonathan Feiner was on MSNBC this morning, asked about the president's 8 p.m. Eastern speech.
I think you'll hear tonight the president describe this perilous moment that we are in globally when it comes to our national security, when it comes to international stability, highlighting in particular, obviously, the ongoing brutal conflict in Ukraine, where the United States is standing shoulder to shoulder with a number of our allies in support of the Ukrainians who have been invaded, obviously, by their neighbor in a flagrant violation of international law. He will also speak more to the conflict that is raging now in Gaza and to the horrific terrorist attack that our ally Israel has suffered at the president's visit yesterday, obviously highlighting that message of solidarity. But this will also be very much a message to the American people, how those conflicts connect to our lives back here, how support from the American people and the Congress, frankly, is essential to maintaining this national leadership that the United States is showing to steer these conflicts in the best possible direction.
Jonathan Feiner is White House Principal Deputy National Security Advisor this morning on MSNBC's Morning Joe program. President's speech from the White House Oval Office, 8 p.m. Eastern, live on the C-SPAN networks. Associated Press reporting from the Gaza Strip that Israel pounded the Gaza Strip with airstrikes on Thursday, including in the south where Palestinians were told to take refuge. And the country's defense minister told ground troops to be ready to invade, though he didn't say when. In Washington, the U.S. Senate unanimously passing a resolution reaffirming U.S. support for Israel and its right to self-defense and condemning Hamas's attacks on civilians. The vote was 97-0. Before that vote, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer spoke on the Senate floor.
Today's bipartisan resolution shows exactly where the United States Senate stands. We stand firmly with Israel and her right to defend herself. Today's bipartisan resolution shows exactly where the United States stands. We condemn the heinous, vicious attacks by the terrorist group Hamas. It is rare that all 100 senators agree on anything, but every one of the 100 of us is here today, united, saying that we are behind Israel. Today's bipartisan resolution shows where we stand. We demand Hamas stop their attacks and release all hostages, including American hostages. We urge the world to unite against Hamas and against nations like Iran that support global terrorism. And this resolution is not the end, it is the beginning. The Senate will back up this resolution with real, swift, decisive action and resources. Let the entire world see that today, Democrats, Republicans alike stand in total unity. We support Israel's absolute right to defend itself. To the Israeli people we say, we stand with you. We feel your pain. We ache with you, and we will act. And to any actor that seeks to take advantage of Israel, the United States Senate says with one unified voice, don't. The resolution also does what everyone in this country in elected office and the press should do: condemn Hamas as a heinous terrorist organization. And this resolution is momentous. The entire Senate today is unified in our support of the Israeli people and against Hamas. And again, to repeat, this resolution is just the start. We will follow it up with swift action and get Israel the help and resources she needs.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on the Senate floor before the 97-0 vote to pass that resolution. Also today, Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, tried and failed to pass another resolution that would both condemn Hamas and condemn what he says is, according to his press release, the anti-Semitic student groups on college campuses that have celebrated the October 7th terrorist attack against Israel. He talked about that resolution on the Senate floor.
Mr. President, perhaps incredibly disturbing, maybe almost as disturbing as the facts of these terrible attacks themselves is the response of some people in this country, on our college campuses in this country, who promptly took to the streets, to the courtyards of these campuses, to the airwaves, to broadcast their support for this genocide against the people of Israel. That's right, I said their support for the genocide against the people of Israel. Listen to what these students said. At Harvard University, students wrote that, and I quote, "They hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence." Think about that. They hold the Israelis, the Jewish people, responsible for their own death and massacres. They hold the Jewish people responsible for their babies' heads being chopped off. They hold the Jewish people responsible for the homicidal maniacs who came to their doors and gunned them down in cold blood. They hold them responsible. Students at New York University School of Law wrote that they believe Israel bears full responsibility for this tremendous loss of life. Full responsibility. Students at Ohio State praised the heroic resistance in Gaza. Heroic. It's now heroic to massacre Jews in cold blood. It's now heroic to try and carry out a genocide against Jewish people.
Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, offering his resolution on the Senate floor. When he was done with his opening remarks, he asked unanimous consent to pass the resolution. Unanimous consent requires that no senator object. Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, did rise to object and explained why.
This resolution is not about condemning Hamas's attacks on Israel. What this resolution does is condemn certain speech around the country. Now, let me just say to my colleague from Missouri, I stand with anybody and second to none when it comes to condemning anti-Semitism, whether in words or in actions. And I have stood up throughout my time in public service to do exactly that. And if the senator from Missouri wants to bring to the floor of the Senate a resolution condemning anti-Semitism, a resolution that points out what we just saw from the most recent FBI statistics about the rise in anti-Semitism, I will join with him in that effort. But what this resolution does is attempt to smear students, many of whom engaged in anti-Semitic remarks, but many who did not. And my view is that when you come to the Senate floor to pass such a resolution and you're talking about freedom of speech, it's very important not to paint a broad brush and condemn everybody engaging in speech.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, on the Senate floor, objecting to the resolution from Senator Josh Hawley. President Biden and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and other administration officials have been warning other actors in the Middle East not to get involved in the war between Israel and Hamas. Today, the Pentagon said that the USS Carney, a Navy destroyer in the Red Sea, shot down multiple missiles launched by Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen that potentially were heading towards Israel. Pentagon Press Secretary is Pat Ryder.
The crew of the guided missile destroyer USS Carney, operating in the northern Red Sea earlier today, shot down 3 land attack cruise missiles and several drones that were launched by Houthi forces in Yemen. This action was a demonstration of the integrated air and missile defense architecture that we have built in the Middle East and that we are prepared to utilize whenever necessary to protect our partners and our interests in this important region. There were no casualties to U.S. forces and none that we know of to any civilians on the ground. Information about these engagements is still being processed. We cannot say for certain what these missiles and drones were targeting, but they were launched from Yemen, heading north along the Red Sea, potentially towards targets in Israel.
The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, also a brigadier general, in the Pentagon briefing room. From ABC News, U.S. citizens traveling abroad are urged to exercise increased caution in light of the heightened global tension spurred by Hamas's terror attack on Israel and the unfolding Israeli-Hamas war, the State Department said in a new advisory on Thursday. Due to increased tensions in various locations around the world, the potential for terrorist attacks, demonstrations, or violent actions against U.S. citizens and interests, the Department of State advises U.S. citizens overseas to exercise increased caution, officials said in the worldwide caution alert. Matthew Miller, the State Department spokesperson, getting questions about it today.
The U.S. State Department on Tuesday raised its travel alert for Lebanon to do not travel, and also asked for the American citizens to make arrangements to leave the country as soon as possible. Do you have any additional information about the situation in Lebanon? Do you think it might escalate? And do you have, why you're asking U.S. citizens to leave as soon as possible?
So we have taken that measure because we've seen events on the ground. Well, let me back up and say we are constantly assessing the safety and security of our personnel in every place where we operate overseas. We are constantly assessing the safety of the situation on the ground so we can give appropriate travel warnings and appropriate guidance to American citizens. We took the step in Lebanon because we've seen increased activity there that we thought warranted it. You've seen a number of protests around the U.S. Embassy, for example. And then earlier today, we issued a worldwide caution alert where we advised U.S. citizens that due to increased tensions in various locations around the world, the potential for terrorist attacks, demonstrations, or violent actions against U.S. citizens and interests, the Department of State advises U.S. citizens overseas to exercise increased caution.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his briefing at the State Department. More from the ABC News article. The last time the State Department issued such a warning, worldwide alert, was August 2022, following the counterterrorism strike in Afghanistan that killed al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. Spokesperson Matthew Miller also asked today about reports that another U.S. journalist has been detained in Russia. A Russian-American working as an editor for Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty, a media company that is funded by the U.S. government. She's been charged with failing to register as a foreign agent as a person collecting information on Russian military activities.
The arrest in Russia of RFE journalists. Do you have anything to say about this?
I do. We, of course, have no higher priority than the safety and security of U.S. citizens overseas. We are aware of reports concerning the detention of Alsu Kurmasheva in Russia. Whenever a U.S. citizen is detained overseas, the department works to provide all appropriate assistance. We have not been officially notified by the government of Russia about this arrest yet, but this is a case we have been tracking since May, when the Russian government seized her passports and prevented her from leaving the country. We haven't made the details of our work public until now because we thought it was not helpful to the cause to get her to leave. But this appears to be another case of the Russian government harassing U.S. citizens, which is why we continue to have a level 4 travel warning and encourage all U.S. citizens not to travel to Russia for any reason.
Okay, so when you say that they haven't, there has been absolutely no radio silence, at least so far, from the Russians about her case.
That's correct. And okay. I'll just say one thing about that. She's a dual citizen. Yeah. And as you're aware, the Russian government has refused, as often in the past, refused consular access when it comes to cases of dual citizenship. So we will be seeking more information about the case.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller. The Committee to Protect Journalists, a reporters' rights organization, also calling the accusations against this Russian-American journalist spurious, demanding the charges be dropped and she be released. The charges carry a sentence of up to 5 years in prison. Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source on C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. New York Times story, Jerome H. Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, reiterated the central bank's commitment to moving forward carefully with further rate moves in a speech on Thursday. But he also said that the central bank might need to raise interest rates more if economic data continued to come in hot. Mr. Powell tried to paint a balanced picture of the challenge facing the Fed. In remarks before the Economic Club of New York, he emphasized that the Fed is trying to weigh two goals against one another. It wants to wrestle inflation fully under control, but it also wants to avoid doing too much and unnecessarily hurting the economy. Chair Powell was interviewed by David Weston, an anchor on Bloomberg Television.
You mentioned the long-term equilibrium rate, which you talked about again back in Jackson Hole in August of 2020. Back then you said you thought the sort of consensus had come down. I think it was from like 4.25% to 2.5%. Where is it today?
So I think by any reckoning, long-term interest rates and the neutral interest rate came down steadily over the course of several decades. So where is it today? I don't know. We're finding it. Basically, the idea was that I think the median indication of what the real neutral rate was around 50 basis points before the pandemic. It may have risen in the near term. The real question that matters, though, is will it rise in the long term? And that we don't know.
But do you need to know it in order to conduct monetary policy? I mean, you must have to have at least a theory. I mean, I'm not saying you have to be right about it, but you have to have a hypothesis, don't you? As you look at the data, you have to put the data through some sort of theory.
So we all write down our estimates of the longer run neutral rate every quarter in the summary of economic projections. And that's based on models. It's based on also looking out the window and including lags, thinking how are our current rates affecting the economy. So the evidence of your eyes is that the economy is handling much higher rates, at least for now, without difficulty. So notionally, that might tell you that the neutral rate has risen, or it may just tell you that we haven't had rates high enough for long enough. You're right, though, but we have models for everything. We have formulas for everything. Ultimately, as a practitioner, we have to be focused on what the economy is telling us, even taking lags into account. What's it telling us? Does it feel like policy is too tight right now? I would have to say no. I think the evidence is not that policy is too tight right now. And we're at 5.25% to 5.5%.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at the Economic Club of New York in New York City. The Fed has raised rates from near zero to that 5.25% to 5.5% over the past 19 months. Policymakers now debating whether they need to raise rates one more time in 2023. There are two more Fed meetings this year. Decisions on interest rates will be announced November 1st and December 13th. CNBC reports that the start of Fed Chair Powell's speech on Thursday was delayed by climate activists protesting at the club. The protesters appeared to be from a group called Climate Defiance. The group's mission statement calls for the end of fossil fuel extraction on federal lands and waters, among other items. The activists came to the front of the room at the event carrying a sign and repeating a chant about fossil finance. The sign said, "Fed is burning and money futures planet." The lights in the room were dimmed as security appeared to remove the protesters. That from CNBC. Here's a bit of what it sounded like. Climate protesters at the Economic Club of New York program with the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Wall Street today, the Dow down 250, NASDAQ down 128, S&P down 36. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced today that the Senate historian Betty Coed will retire at the end of this week, capping off a 25-year career in the Senate historian's office. C-SPAN interviewed her in 2016 and asked how she got involved in this line of work.
I've been in the Senate for 18 years. I came in June of 1998. I was the assistant historian, then the associate historian, and I've been the Senate historian since June 1st of 2015.
What's a day like?
They're very rarely the same. One of the things I love about my job is that you don't really know when you go into the office just what you're going to be working on, because you'll go into the office thinking, I'm going to dig into this research project or work on that writing project, and then the phone rings and something's happened, somebody's said something, a senator has made a statement, And then you immediately get pulled into other directions because people want to know, has that ever happened before? Has anyone ever said that before? Has this type of bill ever been passed before? And so you really quickly go from topic to topic all day long. So you have to spin a lot of plates at one time. I like that. I think it's fun and it's interesting. But although I do sort of long for days when I can just sit down and dig into a big research project and stick with it all day.
When did you first get interested in the Senate?
Well, when I was in graduate school, when I was getting my PhD in political history, and I was very interested in policy history and very interested in political history in general, but particularly the workings of Congress. So much of the political history is focused on the presidential story, and so I became very interested in how Congress has a role to play in that story. And that's how I got into the Senate. I came into the Senate Historical Office with a background in policy history, political history, and congressional history, not so much specifically Senate history.
From where?
From the University of California, Santa Barbara.
The Senate historian Betty Coed on C-SPAN's interview program Q&A in 2016. It was announced today that she is retiring at the end of this week. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell both paying tribute on the Senate floor and both mentioning that Betty Coed speaks to the senators once a week.
It's a great undertaking to chronicle the history of an institution so unique, so rich with significant events, so influential in the landscape of our nation. But for the last 25 years, Betty has done that with the utmost professionalism, devotion, and a bit of a flair. Every week, she gives us a little history lesson at our lunches, our Tuesday luncheons, and every member looks forward to hearing what she has come up with. And it's amazing. We learn a lot, and we enjoy it.
Back in 2009, when former Senate historian Richard Baker retired, I invited Betty to start visiting the Republican conference lunches to deliver weekly presentations on Senate history. By all accounts, Betty's history minutes were the highlight of many a lunch. In fact, they were all so popular that we asked her to turn these stories into a book. And I'm glad to say that impressive volume illustrating some of the most dramatic and significant events in the Senate's history was actually published earlier this year.
Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, the minority leader. Before that, Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the majority leader on the Senate floor today, paying tribute to Betty Coed, the Senate historian who's retiring at the end of this week. The Senate historian's office was created in 1975, and there have only been 3 since then: Richard Baker, Donald Ritchie, and Betty Coed. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, word for word, and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.